Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Manisha Arial. I'm the Global Lead for Digital Development at Chemonics and one of the co-organizers of this annual Global Forum. If you are just joining us, a very warm welcome to the fourth annual Global Digital Development Forum. We started GDDF at midnight today, and we've been going strong for the last 9 hours. We've had fabulous keynotes and breakout sessions, very insightful lightning talks and interactive workshops, and we are still going strong. We are thrilled to have USAID Deputy Assistant Administrator Mark Messick join us this morning to lead the East Coast keynote. Deputy Assistant Administrator Messick oversees both the Innovation Technology and Research Hub and the Local Faith and Transformative Partnership Hub at the Bureau for Development, Democracy, and Innovation. Mark was the USAID Mission Director for Kenya in East Africa prior to this appointment, and in his 17 years with USAID has served in a number of countries from Afghanistan to Uganda. Mark will be joined today by Rosalind Doctor, Vice President for Technology and Science Policy at IBM, and Karim Kundi, Managing Partner at Deloitte Tunisia. Let's head over to the keynote. The race for global digital transformation is on. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Manisha. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. This is an open forum session. We're going to try to stimulate some conversation and some thoughts from you. So please utilize the chat to give us your questions, your concerns, your suggestions, and any other input that you think is important for us to start considering as a community. I'm really pleased that the Global Digital Development Forum's organized this panel. We're honored to have Rosalind Doctor here from IBM and Karim Kundi from Deloitte, from Tunisia actually today. So it's afternoon for him. We're really delighted to have you both here. I'll let you both introduce yourself, but let me just say a couple of things to frame this discussion. One is, we just had a huge infusion of U.S. government commitment into the digital space through the CHIPS Act, which is about $500 billion of U.S. government funding that will hopefully leverage a lot more resources. And I think that that's a signal from our government and from our nation that we are really serious about trying to figure out how to really transform digital development into the dividends that people around the world should be able to enjoy over the coming decades. We also have a very aggressive People's Republic of China pushing its own agenda with respect to digital, and that creates some interesting dynamics that we'll probably discuss. And from my perspective, I would say we have a private sector in the United States that is interested in working overseas, but may not have really figured out exactly how to do that in a way that links profits with purpose, and I think we have some real challenges around that. So let me turn it over to Rosalind Doctor, and then she'll turn it over to Karim to talk a little bit about their opening discussions, the things that they think are important. Rosalind will talk about it from a private sector perspective, and Karim from a country in the South and his perspective on things. Rosalind, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here. It's conversations like this with the government, private sector, and the NGOs and those working in development that I hope will participate online that can really lead to collective action, scaling, and meaningful and sustainable results. So thank you for allowing me to join this conversation. As said, I'm the Vice President for Technology and Science Policy at IBM. That means I look at all privacy, security, as well as digital transformation policies worldwide for IBM. I serve on our AI ethics board, and I also serve as the staff rep on the President's Advisory Committee for Doing Business in Africa, which just met 2 weeks ago to be a catalyst and an accelerator of the great work this administration has done in putting out digital transformation with Africa. I see lots of opportunities for the private sector to work with government to create and benefit from an enabling environment that'll help us all accelerate digital transformation. I think we all know what is meant by an enabling environment. That's the policies and the people that we need. And the government has been very helpful, the US government, in working with other governments. And we work directly with governments in Africa and across the globe to make sure their data policies, their tax policies, their competition policies, their 5G policies are in a line to be conducive for economic and social growth. We also look at people policies. IBM has made a commitment to train 30 million people by 2030. But we can't do this alone. We need governments to recognize their certification and badging. We work with NGOs for this pro bono platform to make sure it's localized appropriately and helping them do the work that they've been doing a long time in skills development. That's the enabling environment. I think what you talked about, Mark, is the really exciting opportunity for how industry and others can work with government. And that's when the government goes large and looks not just at a problem, but an entire ecosystem. When we do a whole of government approach, like the CHIPS Act, or like PEPFAR, where the result of PEPFAR was a innovative global drug delivery supply chain. And the benefits extended beyond just treating HIV/AIDS, but treating other drugs and benefiting from that infrastructure. In addition to the enabling environment, we need an infrastructure, and that's the roads, the bridges, but also the digital infrastructure, and seeing it as a reusable public good, and that's scalable. These are the opportunities I see for private sector and NGOs to engage with government, and I look forward to talking about how we can think big and do these big approaches, whole of government, and collaborate to have the impacts we all need. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Rosalind. I think the enabling environment in this public-private dynamic is something we need to interrogate a little more. Kareem, over to you.
Yes, sure. So thank you, first of all, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this panel. I'm really happy to be here and to share all my experience and what we've seen, especially on the African region that I know very well since more than 10 years now. So I'm based in Tunisia. I'm the managing partner of Deloitte Tunisia, but at the same time, since more than 10 years now, I'm leading our tech and digital, practice in the Africa Francophone region. So I've been advising a number of businesses and also government and public authorities in defining the digital national strategies, as well as supporting in the implementation of all these strategies, basically across all the African continent. And of course, we've seen in the last 10 years a number of trends. I think we'll see them in more details later on. But basically, what we've seen, in the last 15, 20 years, there was a huge focus on the connectivity. So first, to bring the internet access to the populations. So knowing that there's still a lot of challenges. Some countries, a number of countries, they even the access to power is less than 5% of the total population. So there's really still a main challenge in terms of connectivity and to bring the access to internet to all. But we see more and more, since more than 5 years now, there is also more and more focus on developing the digital service and content. So across the African continent. So this is which is quite new, and the challenges are quite different. The way to support that, the way to implement this kind of projects is very different from the connectivity projects. So I would be happy to share all the trends on this and what's happening in the developing world, and especially on the African continent. So happy again to be part here.
Very good. Thank you. Rosalind, let me start off with a question for you. I think it gets to the heart of some of the initial comments you made. Governments worldwide are scrambling to accelerate their digital transformation and are working hand in hand with the private sector. This means competition can be fierce, especially in light of PRC's significant investments in tandem with Chinese tech companies. How is IBM responding to that competition? And do you think that there are opportunities for donors, development organizations, and civil society groups and technology companies to collectively work together to boost investment and collaboration for a positive digital future?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark, and one I might throw back at you in a moment. But let me first respond at the level of what we talked about before and what Kareem talked about. You need the enabling environment of policy, and it has to go hand in hand with infrastructure. You had mentioned the CHIPS Act, right? In the CHIPS Act, which is really about making sure we have a secure and economically efficient supply chain for our chips, which go into everything that we use today, from our cars to our computers, our smartphones. In that CHIPS Act, there is money for telecommunications, because we can't do any communicating, any sharing of information, setting up supply chains without that infrastructure layer. Kareem, you talked about it, how it's built, the internet connectivity. But we need our telecommunications. Kareem, you have a great background on this, to make sure that there's competition and that they are secure, right? We should not be dependent on any one vendor, and we should make sure that, that we ideally partner with allied nations and the vendors there, right, Mark, to your point. So in the CHIPS Act, there was provisions, not only policies that promote ORAN, which is Open Radio Access Network telecommunications, and open standards for that connectivity, but also funding. And we hope that that funding can go to Africa, right? It's a multilateral fund. NTIA has some, State Department has some, and we'd like to see that. I would say, to the larger question on how we compete as US companies, it's not necessarily the competition, it's the sustainability and the scalability. And that's what open interfaces and an open technology approach can enable. That what we build in one place can be reused, leveraged, built upon, and managed and maintained locally when you use open interfaces and you take an open tech approach. I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer. You're a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I joined IBM because of its commitment to open technologies, because I do think it's a catalyst. But I'd like to throw that question back to you, Mark, right? From your perspective at USAID, your long history there, working in Kenya, being a Peace Corps volunteer, how do you see how donors could catalyze, how USAID is helping donors catalyze? What has actually worked, in your view, that has had the greatest impact that we should take in mind from the private sector?
Thanks for that. From my perspective and what I've seen over the African continent in the last 17 years is an incredible evolution in terms of telecoms and other aspects of the accessibility issue that Kareem referred to. I guess from my point of view is, I think donors like USAID and the World Bank and others, we need to come in and fill gaps where we see market failure. And, as these markets evolve, there are issues that start to come up with them that we have to find a way to address. I think somehow the relationship between local national telecoms companies and governments has become a little too cozy. And so what do we need to do about that in terms of getting these more open systems and making sure that there is a level playing field for everyone in these spaces to be able to compete fairly? I think that's definitely something we need to do. But my real concern is, right now, I really feel like that there's a challenge between the public sector, private sector, and civil society, in that the private sector and civil society do not really speak with one voice. And I think that there needs to be some platforms to allow that. If you look at how things operate globally and in the US in particular, we have trade associations, we have a whole series of entities that end up generating a voice that the public sector cannot ignore. And so, and if that unified voice doesn't exist, what we find is that the governments can pick and choose who they decide to listen to. I think nationally, I think in Tunisia there needs to be better organization of private sector and civil society as a voice of to government about how to improve digital development in their country. And so I think we really have a lot of work to do, and I think that is a place where donors need to put some resources to help enable this voice to coalesce on the one hand in terms of getting things organized, but then also in terms of supporting their advocacy efforts, and then linking them and networking them to deal with issues that are above the national level in terms of regional and global challenges that we have. I mean, I would love to see a private sector and civil society voice about digital in the G20, for example, in those kinds of spaces. So I think we have a lot of work to do that. I think we have a lot of opportunities, but the issue is, how do you translate those opportunities into meaningful change? So Kareem, I've got a question for you too, given your extensive experience in Europe and the lifelong work that you've been doing in Tunisia. One of the goals of USAID and the U.S. government is to advance open, interoperable, reliable, and secure digital ecosystems and multi-stakeholder approaches to internet governance. You've worked with many governments in West and North Africa on their digital transformation efforts. In light of the PRC's significant systematic investments across Africa, what have you heard are the challenges that governments in the region are facing when it comes to investing in an affirmative vision of the internet? And what can donors like USAID, tech companies like IBM do to support governments in committing to a positive digital future that reinforces more democratic principles and human rights?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from all the experience I had with advising the governments, especially in the African region, I mean, clearly the internet neutrality and the digital sovereignty is really a key challenge, for all the government, and they see it. So it's really identified as one of the key challenges when it comes to developing the digital at the country level. So having said that, I think the support that is needed is really on the policies and how to empower this governments, in order to put in place all the regulatory, framework in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of regulation of data, of the digital services. This is extremely important, and the way I see the support of the donors is really on these kind of aspects, on putting in place the right environment in terms of policies to really ensure the security, the neutrality, and and try to protect the data and so on. And this really only comes from the public authorities that we need to support. The second aspect of that is it's about skills. The public services and the regulatory authorities, they need to have also all the necessary skills in order to have all the power to have the control of the situation, on the data, on the security, on the different networks. So the skills development is an extremely important point as well, because that's what will make the difference. At the country level, in order to be able to master these topics and ensure the security of the data and all kind of digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
So Kareem, on that, what do you think are some of the challenges with respect to that of the private sector itself?
Yeah, the private sector, of course, plays a major role, as you correctly said. We see that most of the private sectors are not well organized. They don't have one voice. They don't have really a kind of authority or a kind of council that can talk they can talk for the private sector, but I think that's where the support is needed, because all this, can come only from the private sector. But in order to have a strong private sector, we need to have a local market as well, because the private sector will not move if you don't have a local market. If I talk about Africa, we have a lot of small countries, of course. So we have the challenge of the economic integration between the countries in Africa. Sometimes it's much easier to make business between an African country and a Western country than between two African countries. So having the single market for the digital is extremely important to really foster and push really the private sector to become actually stronger and to be able to address all the challenges in developing the digital in all these countries.
Very good. Rosalind, you want to add something?
Thanks, Mark. I think Karim framed this well, and you asked a great question. What could governments do to help? We talked about the enabling environment of skills. IBM is, and I'm sure others are, training those regulators, even in the country you served in Kenya, right? Making sure telco regulators have the skills. For anybody listening today, you can go to skillsbuild.org. You talked about organizing. I think picking a few working platforms and building the organization from what has already worked, Mark, is a great approach to next steps. And we are coming together, industry, NGOs, around skills development. We should see where are the gaps, where are we missing, and where can we accelerate. I think another answer of where we're coming together and where government can help is de-risking investments, incentives, and then helping scale. The larger the government goes, that was one of the advantages of PEPFAR. It was a massive infusion, right? The US government is looking at digital transformation with Africa. We love that it's with Africa, not for Africa. And we hope that that'll be funded to the levels it needs to have the impact. And that's at a higher holistic all of government approach. But where we can identify what's worked and have public goods, we talked a little bit about that are scalable, that's where I think we can catalyze action.
So talk a little bit more, Rosalind, about digital public goods and what some of the next steps that we need to take in terms of trying to close the gaps that we've talked about here.
Yeah, and this is a topic that I love as IBM because of our commitment to open standards. When you build something, right, that's used for the common good, how scalable is it and how reusable is it? And that's where the competition comes in the policy. When you can default where available to an open platform, when you build that, then whatever service you have could be moved ideally to another environment, another government for the same benefits, right? It has to be localized, it has to be customized, but it doesn't have to be rebuilt from scratch, and you're not creating different platforms to put the services on top of. It's not the redundancy. So that's what a public good is. It's also coding, right? We do call for code where we invite NGOs, we invite businesses, we invite anyone, governments, to come together and say, if this data is available, what can you create for the public good that can be reused? And we've seen water projects that have been used in multiple governments and our multiple locations, because part of a call for code or any development should not just be, can it be used right here, right now, but how scalable and reusable is this solution?
Very good. One question that we've got from our participants is that should NetHope or Dial be that voice for ICT for development? I think that's definitely an option in terms of how they're organized. I don't know if you, Rosalind or Karim, have had any experience with Dial or NetHope, but it might be good to hear if you have any other ideas about how to build this voice of the private sector and civil society, both globally and nationally, as a force for good in the digital space.
I'll give a bigger picture answer. Mm-hmm. I think any voice is important for the conversation. And I don't want to comment on those two programs, right? It's a bigger picture is, do we have the data to see if they're having the impact? We want to have voice and scale where we have the data that shows what we're doing is having the intended impact, and it is scalable, it is reusable. So when I talk about a voice, which might be different than how others see a voice, and I welcome conversation and people to push back on this, it's what is the data showing that we're having an impact? Not just that we have X number of data centers in a country, or this people have moved to the cloud, or that the enabling environment is for cross-border data flow, but where has the data had the impact that we've increased our productivity in farming, where we've moved the needle on sustainability, and where we have the data that says we're having an impact, that's where the voice comes in, right? And that's where we should coalesce around and say, look, this is an area we need to do more together and to have the impacts that you talked about earlier, Mark.
Very good. Kareem, there's an interesting question about what should be the role of communities in this process of engaging with the ecosystem and making sure that it's meeting their needs. How do you see that playing out in the places you've worked?
It's a great question indeed. If you see the support of the community or even the support of the donors, in general, there's always a question and the balance to find on between how to try to implement the project as fast as possible and bring all the needed expertise for that fly in, and at the same time how to build the local skills and the local actually private sector and the local actually communities. And it's always a very difficult balance, But in terms of trend that I see today is that there's a shift to the second option today, where we have the donors and the communities to be more in a kind of facilitating and supporting role to the local actually, the private sector. Why? Because most of them they found out through the time that when you come to implement a project with the flying expertise, the project can be done fast, but then you find nobody to maintain it in the mid and in the long term because you don't have the local skills. Of course, it's fast, but so it's always a kind of trade-off. So I see a shift today, to have the donors to more focus on developing the local actually capabilities in terms of digitals in the civil society, and something that is very specific to the African continent. More than 60% of the African population is less than 19 years old. In 2050, there will be more than 1 billion people that will be less than 18 years old, and a bit more than 200 million Europe and North America, combined. So all the investment, I think, needs to be on the youth, on the population, and how to foster the innovation and the entrepreneurship ecosystem with the young population and push them to have an active role in terms of policy making. I saw a great experience in Tunisia 5 years ago, the Startup Act, which is all the policies for the startup ecosystem that was put in place in Tunisia. This was done by the startup actually community. They came up, with the project, and now I see there is a duplication of the same concept in like 6 or 7 countries in Africa, in Senegal, in the case of Benin, the Mauritania, to use exactly the same concept. And I think this kind of approach that we really foster and really push all the countries really to develop the local skills.
Very good. On a different aspect of the skills training, Roslyn, we have a question that says a lot of organizations and tech companies offer skills training platforms, but the real need is jobs. How do we help countries create jobs for young people in Africa, Asia, and Latin America?
So that's a great question and near and dear to my heart, right? Peace Corps volunteers and all of us, it's skills transfer. Is that, and this comes back to data, and I'm going to throw in AI. We haven't talked about technologies, but now with AI, we can look and see what the demand is when you have data. So let me give you an example from a project in Indonesia. That you can scour one ads, you can poll people. There's a lot of ways you can get access of what is needed in the marketplace, and then infuse that with where we see technology developing and where we see future needs. And so we did this in Indonesia, And it was ascertained that we need people that can manage servers and start moving towards cloud. We don't need all cloud operators at the moment. And so once we understand where industry and government need skills, then we can work with local partners to provide those skills. The government can maybe give a little incentive to have a building. NGOs can help recruit people that would benefit from the skills and the right targeted audience. And we're growing to skill 8,000 people on jobs, on certifications that are recognized and skills that are needed in the marketplace by banks, telcos, and anyone in the country that's moving and using technology.
Very good. Let's see here. We have another question. Here's the question. Africa should be redefined to include all 50 countries, not a handful of countries like Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and at times Ethiopia. Most of the investment and discussions focus on the above countries. What will change? How can we broaden the discussion to include all the other countries in Africa? So this whole issue of accessibility and equity, maybe Kareem, you can take that, and then Rosin, you may have something to add.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have one single answer to that. It's the answer is the economic integration between the countries. If you want to address this question at a political level, it will never be sorted out. So the solution is the economic integration through the youth force. Through the young population. The digital sector is a great sector that can really develop this kind of integration, because you don't have goods, you don't have the issues of the visas. We are talking about digital products, so it can be a great catalyst for the economic integration. That's really the only way I see today, is to have a bigger market for all, and the one Africa market actually.
If I can just add one thought to that, and then we can go on to the next question, and that is the Africa Continent Free Trade Agreement, right? The U.S. government has signed an MOU to work with them on implementing that. Private sector has said that we would help with technical assistance, that to look at it as, yes, there's many countries, and each one has their own sovereignty and their own economic goals and opportunities and unique beauties, having visited many of them. But where we can have trade and where there can be recognition of each other's policies and commonalities to have that trade. So if you sell medical devices in one country or drugs in one country, you don't have to get, or even if you develop them in South Africa, you should be able to sell them to the neighboring country, which unfortunately right now there's barriers. But through free trade agreements, I think we can see lots of improvements.
Very good. Let's start the winding up. And so what I'd like to do is sort of cut to the chase a little bit. And if each of you could talk about, given sort of this state of the art, state of play that we have right now across the world in the digital development space, what would you say are from your perspective, the top 3 things based on the conversation that we had that we really, really do need to zero in on in the coming 12 to 24 months? I'll start with you, Kareem, on that one.
Yeah, sure. I think the 2-3 priority actions that I see, I think the first point is really to support the countries in terms of, in order to set up the right environment. So we've talked about the policies. We have also the skills. And the third point I see on the environment is also to set up the enabling digital services, which are the digital ID, the digital payment, and the interoperability between the systems. This is, I think, if you don't have this, there is no chance to have digital development at the country level. Yeah. So we talked also about the skills, development. So it's to have a new approach to facilitate and support the local the local skills in order for them to implement different projects. And I think about the policies, we have talked about it since the beginning of the session, the support to have the right policy, even some basic things, like the public sourcing, the public-private, the partnership, these kind of things can be really a showstopper. On many kind of things. So it's not only about policies in the digital space, but even wider. It's the digital finance. This kind of stuff. If you don't have the right policies, it cannot really be developed at all. So if I summarize it, support to policies, the local skills, and the third one is to support the implementation of the digital enabling platforms. So the ID. The digital ID, the payment, and the interoperability.
Very good. Excellent. Rosalind, what about you?
I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this. IBM is 110 years old. We first sold cheese slicers, and then we did punch cards. We also did the barcodes you find on foods, and we did census data. Right, in Africa and in the United States. We, as IBM, have to continually digitally transform. We are not the same company we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. What I would like is the collective experience that those listening today, those on the, in this panel with me, on what has been the success factors for digital transformation. Today, we can understand that better. We can apply learning through AI, through better collection of data, analysis of that data, to know what works and double down on that. And I think we need to take that moment to reflect on what has worked. USAID does that as well. Can we get more data to say this is working at the mission level? This is working and able to scale this. How can we make this evidence-based? Because that's what IBM has done to transform ourselves. And then I couldn't leave without saying open standards, open standards, open standards. Because if you invest in open standards and you prioritize that, then you've already gotten half the battle. Once you know what works, you can replicate more easily.
Very good. So let me add just a few things. I look at things a little bit differently in terms of I think we've talked about some of the strengths of the system right now, and then also some of its challenges and weaknesses. And I think for me, one of the things that we really need to do is to deepen the collaborative platforms across the ecosystem. I think that governments need to strengthen their relationships, and so that there's more cross-border collaboration and coherence. A lot of this scale issue, especially in some of the smaller countries, they need to have agreement with the neighboring countries to create a sufficient size market for things to be able to happen and for them to gain access to things. And we know that. But I also think the public sector, the private sector also needs to get better organized and have a better collaborative platform. We have a lot of big players like IBM and Amazon and others, but we have hundreds and thousands of smaller players, and Kareem's point about how do you balance the local with the international, the exogenous with the endogenous, I think is a really big challenge. And I think we need to find a way to start analyzing that and looking at that and figuring out within these platforms how to enhance the collaboration between large and small, between countries, in such a way that we can really make some progress rather than just focusing on competition and bottom lines all the time. I think that the collaborative piece is a way for us to advance in an important way. I also, one of the things that's come up that I also agree with, and I think we need stronger connectivity and networks at all levels, and we need to figure out how to enable those things across skills development and all of the different aspects that you all have identified as important for this piece. And then the last thing that I'll say is all this leads to this is where the issue of equity becomes such an important point of the digital being a driver for greater equity rather than accentuating the haves and the have-nots. And I think we really need to make sure that we are generating things that businesses and opportunities that allow national governments to address their inequities in their society, that we can use digital as a leapfrog for gaining the opportunity to really have a gretter impact on many more people than we are right now. And so the accessibility issue, I think, is really important. So this has been a really great discussion. Let's figure out how we start winding up. I'll give you guys each a couple of minutes to sort of give your final reflections and thoughts, and then we'll hand it back over to the organizers. So, Rosalind, why don't you go ahead and start with some final comments?
Sure. Thank you so much for being part of this and being here with you today. I'm going to just amplify what you said at the end. How can we make sure that technological benefits accrue to all, right? It's something that's very important to IBM. We have our AI and technology principles that says AI is augmented intelligence. How could it help the capacity of individuals? And one of our principles is that training, that we want to make sure that everyone is skilled. And so the potential of the internet to democratize access to data, democratize access to opportunities, we've seen it, but we've only seen a hint of it where there is connectivity, right? Especially in Africa and developing countries. So we support any opportunity that the government provides and where we can work with partners. IBM does not succeed without our partners, which are small businesses, which are local businesses on the ground, and big companies. We partner with people of all sizes, but we support opportunities where the government will help de-risk investment in infrastructure and incentivize those risks so that U.S. companies can be competitive and that the platforms that we build, as we talked about, can be open so that you have competition, so you can enable innovation and creativity on top of that platform, but also for the point you made for equitable access, so that anyone with an idea, a vision, a dream can join the global marketplace. That's what digital will provide, is that democratization of data with skills, with the right policies, that we can raise all ships with the data transformation. And so I look forward to working with anyone on the phone here. Send me an email, reach out, go to skillsbuild.org, and happy to learn and grow with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Kareem, over to you.
Yeah, so maybe just focus again on the space I know, which is the African continent. I think Africa today and its population, is in a period where either we'll become a super user of the digital only. I mean, I would say only a user of the digital, or also become an operator and the content actually creator. There is a big risk, to go on the first side, and so which is, I think, the main challenge, because I believe digital is the way to create the employment in Africa, giving the large young population. The entrepreneurship is the only way to actually create employment today in Africa. We need to create more than 80,000 employment per day on all the continent, just to have the youth population of the 1 billion that will come in 20 years, to have a job. I think digital is a key enabler for that. And the good thing also with the digital is that you don't need to have a lot of investment, as a youth, you don't need much, to have access to the digital, and you can have basically the same chance as a young in Africa as it is in Asia or in the US or in Europe. And this is a major change today now. So it's all about, it's again the same topics, but it's all about setting up the right environment to have this future young population be able to play in the digital space, because it's the only way today, I think, to address the main challenges on the African continent.
Thank you. Thank you, Kareem. Thank you, Rosalind. So, we've gone through and discussed a litany of challenges and opportunities in the digital space. We've talked about the enabling environment in terms of the need for economic integration, for local market development, better regional linkages, and the whole infrastructure aspect to all of this as well. We've talked about public-private partnerships. We've talked about accessibility. We've talked about digital services and content. We've talked about the issue of digital sovereignty and internet neutrality. We've talked about skills development from the point of view of policymakers as well as entrepreneurs. We've talked about scaling and digital public goods and the data that we need to demonstrate effects and impact. We've talked about what the role of communities are and how the public sector, private sector, and civil society need to coalesce. We've talked about some of the technology aspects, like the whole issue around AI, which I think is a huge opportunity as well. And we've talked about market development in terms of labor and services. We've talked about risks, and we've talked about the need to really figure out how do we infuse digital development and digital solutions into every sector that a country is involved in. So I want to thank you both for this, really, really wide-ranging conversation, and I think I've really enjoyed it, and I've taken lots of notes for myself. I think I've learned a lot, so I want to thank you both, and we'll turn it back over to the organizers. Manisha, back to you.